President Trump expected to announce a strategy to lower prescription drug costs later today. The plan will likely focus on improvements to the way drug prices are negotiated. Also expect proposal which will allow patients, particularly seniors, to pay less out of pocket for their medication. Joining me now, Politico's Ben White, and back with me, Jason Johnson, Ron Insana. Ben, to you first. White House said in a summary of the plan, quote, other countries use socialized health care to command unfairly low prices from U.S. drug makers. This places burden of financing drug development largely on American patients and taxpayers, subsidizes foreign consumers, and reduces innovation and the development of new treatments. Is that meant to imply that other companies should pay more and Americans should pay less?
Yeah, I think that's the idea. I mean, Trump always has this obsession that we're getting taken advantage of by other countries. He does it on NATO, that they're not paying enough, that other countries aren't paying enough for defense in the Middle East, and now he's applying it to drug prices. I mean, there may be some truth in there that they're heavily subsidized in Europe and elsewhere, and not as much here. But, you know, we lose the forest for the trees. The big thing he promised, the thing he said he was going to do, was allow Medicare, this giant buyer of 40% of all drugs, to negotiate drug prices. That would have made a real dent in drug prices. But Big Pharma doesn't want that. Big Pharma doesn't want us to be able to import drugs from Canada and elsewhere. And those two big things that he could have done, he's not doing. So there's a bunch of small bore stuff in here, which may be helpful at the margins, but this is not the big thing he promised. And the problem is not that other countries are better at doing cheaper drugs than we are. We could maybe follow their lead in that respect.
If one wanted to be sassy, they could call that the Novartis effect. And Novartis paid Michael Cohen pennies then, if you consider walking away from this pledge. The Trump administration does do a very good job touting and ticking through Trump campaign promises, and when the president fulfills them, whether it's the Paris Climate Accord, whether it's TPP, or most recently, the Iran deal. What is the White House's rationale, though? It can't be Big Pharma told us not to. What is the White House explanation for not fulfilling the promise to drop Medicare prices, Medicare drug prices?
I don't think they really have one, to be honest with you. I mean, I've read what was said last night at this briefing. They just sort of said they don't think it's a good idea and it's not the main problem that we have here. But I have not seen, and maybe Ron or your other guest can explain it to me, I've not seen a rationale for why it would be a bad idea for this giant buyer of drugs to be able to negotiate lower prices for Medicare consumers, other than what your explanation is, that people like Novartis and Eli Lilly and big drug makers just got to them and said, we don't want this. It's going to be bad for our business and our bottom line. If there is a good rationale for not doing it, I don't know what it is.
Well, Novartis learned how to speak Trump. Ron, in an op-ed for Fox, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar wrote, quote, we are going to give Medicare Part D plans better tools to negotiate discounts on behalf of our seniors, tools that private sector health plans often already use. Now, they told the New York Times that Medicare won't be negotiating directly. So how are these tools going to work?
I don't know. And the fact that the private sector uses this type of negotiating power, whether it's Walmart, Costco, large drugstores, pharmacy benefit managers, we laud that as a tool of capitalism to drive down prices and increase efficiency.
Walmart can negotiate, but Medicare can't.
But let me add one other point. It's not just this administration. Our senators from New Jersey, both of whom are Democrats, this is one of the largest drug-producing states in the country, have voted against these measures as well.
Excellent point.
This is why we're going to have difficulty getting a bipartisan solution, right? Everyone thinks this is a good idea, but Big Pharma doesn't care. They're going to pay, and they're going to threaten politicians who would want to push forward this deal.
And that's not just Republicans.
Exactly. No. They're going to pay. They will say, hey, Republicans,
against us, so is Menendez.
Republicans, Democrats, they're going to make sure that they're on the book saying, hey, if you guys try and push for this, we're going to hurt you. I wish, and I really do, because I think this is the kind of thing that if you sat down in a meeting, I bet you this is the kind of thing you could get Donald Trump to agree on. He campaigned on this sort of thing. But this is that sort of complicated element of congressional politics that this president didn't understand. And
doesn't the VA do it as well?
Yes, yeah, they can.
Then lawmakers who vote against this, what is their explanation for it, Ben? It's like back when I was trying to figure out what lawmakers wanted to keep carried interest. I couldn't find out who they were. Their names and faces never popped up. In this, when lawmakers vote against it, what's their rationale?
Well, the rationale generally, as I've seen it, is this is big government controlling health care, and that the government shouldn't be throwing its weight around in this way. Let the market decide. It's all nonsense, of course.
But they're not letting the market decide if you allow private industry.
I'm just telling you, Stephanie, I don't happen to agree with this rhetoric, but it's what gets used when they talk about it. But it is, bottom line, Big Pharma writes us big checks, lobbies enormously, and they don't like this. They don't like the idea of lower prices for their signature drugs, and so they get members of Congress to oppose it. And I think Trump has learned that reality. He was populist on the campaign trail because this is such a critical issue in economics for Americans. Americans care about their gas prices, and they care about the drugs, the cost of the drugs when they go to the drugstore to buy them. So he tapped into that very smartly on the campaign trail. But now he seems to have fallen victim to the exact same thing that members of Congress do, which is we got to do what Big Pharma wants here. And this is their big, scary thing that they don't want. Who knows? Maybe he throws a curveball and says, forget it. I'm going to let the government negotiate. I doubt it. But with Trump, we never know until he says it.
I don't know. We'll see. This is the kind of thing that Trump campaigned on. I think he actually believes in, and he'd get a whole lot of support, not necessarily from lawmakers, but from everyday Americans across the spectrum. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up the show, and you know what that means. Good news. There's always